and Kristen Carter, I think, and everybody else involved.
Is an inversion of reality. You have, for example, the people who are accused of being the most racist are the people who are working the hardest to not be racist. Kind of by a rule. Why? Because in reality, because they're soft targets is why. Because they can be reliably expected. You know, these guys who say, well, I don't want to...
Soft targets. So, how does that equate into where I'm stuck at the moment, since there are smarter people than myself who've known this, who do some daily function with this knowledge? I was built for a different purpose. I still am required to try to figure out my way back to wherever I am. He mentioned something. Now, what's interesting is, it says American thought leaders. Now, this gentleman is, and not to be snippy, but he is much smarter than I am. He seems to socialize in a higher echelon than I've ever been able to, I say ascertain, but I mean Asha in Psychtish. So he's gotten there. He uses these words. Again, I use Special Task Force Mark. He talks of something called a Marxism. Again, does that come from Mark? I mean, directly? Then he speaks of some arborist method. And I'm like, all right, so now, arborvitae, that's the growth of something natural. And I'm like, so now is that like grassroots movement where it's not like a tree root that's got like deep roots, or it's just like watching AstroTurf and like the grass grow? I don't know. It gets confusing. Then there's a man that he's speaking with on a very eloquent level, very sophisticated, very classy, I would say. A conversation and a group I would much rather be introduced to and involved with than where I got stuck. And so he's speaking to a man. Now, the man says the word about, which is how the lower 48 says it. He says, they inflect differently in Canada. But it sounds like a bout. Like a bout of what? That sounds epidemiological. Like you got a bout of what? Like a B-O-U-T. Is that like a spill? S-P-I-L-L. You catch a cold? C-O-L-D. I mean, you something went wrong. I mean, it sounds like, because when you get a bout of something, it sounds like a problem.
Offend anybody, well, then it's very easy to manipulate that person's behavior to say, oh, well, this offends me, that offends me too, everything offends me.
Oh, and then they speak of this World Economic Forum I've never even heard of. Lewis had some worldwide corporate network he was working on for a while, WCN. I have no idea what he did during that time period. I was detached from his reality. He didn't have a space for me. He didn't involve me. He didn't invite me in. At some point, he had something. He, at that company, hired Jason to do some audio engineering in the beginning with podcasts. But I don't know what the heck happened there. But I lived my life very single and separate from my father. No idea why. It's just the road that led me here.
It seems to me, okay? And certainly a number of guests I've had on the show have pointed this out, that globalists, for lack of a better term, to kind of group people who believe there should be some sort of global governance or this kind of, at least this kind of direction, deal with the big problems of the age, perhaps the people at the World Economic Forum that you described, sort of collaborating around the grand problems of humanity. And then people who subscribe to woke ideology, that they have a lot in common and they're working in concert, right? This is some.
I don't know where they find their working idols. I mean, I'm just idling here, being an IDLE, like an engine all to myself. I know there's somewhere in the world, there's Tumas roast beef. I think that whatever, I met him when I was younger. He knows who he is and he knows what that means in tribal speak. Dances with wolves and all. So it is really confusing. Then he mentioned something, yeah, well, we'll go back to what he says, so I don't have to paraphrase.
That I observe. But more recently, I've been thinking to myself, it strikes me, I'm not exactly sure about that, because again, the woke ideology, as I've learned more from people like yourself and many others in my own reading, the internal contradictions are so many that it's just simply not going to work for a heck of a lot of people, partially because of what we just described, because of its sort of strong juxtaposition to reality, almost kind of enmity to reality, right? It's almost, and meanwhile these other folks, right, the globalists, for again lack of a better term, these are people who very often actually do have very real power and are actually have a very specific vision for the world. Again, if we're talking about the people meeting, as you mentioned, for example, at the World Economic Forum since the 1970s and so forth, and the youth movements, perhaps.
Youth movements, that's the other one I never even heard of until he mentioned it. Right now it's February 23rd, 2022. I mean, again, someone was in contact with Lou. If you think of Lou as like a foster dad or family, I mean, like, he and Lynn are really real, but we just are from two different planets or worlds. I don't understand why through that channel the proper introductions were never made for permanent ideology on my part, so there wasn't this disparage and this really horrible event.
Because this ideology is so manipulable, maybe they're using it.
I think they are using it. You don't see a whole lot of kind of the pure theorists sitting at the table at the World Economic Forum, for example. So you have to ask why. You see, with the things coming out of the World Economic Forum, in particular, we'll just go straight to the tool that is their favorite term for a number of years now, but it's really hit public consciousness just recently, which is ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores. You see,
again, I don't know, like, how does he get exposed to this stuff? And how did he get exposed to this World Economic Forum and this youth movement? I don't understand those either. I mean, how does one get socially involved with the correct groups throughout their life to stay current and up to date? Why is there some ostracization? It gets really confusing. And then someone, somewhere, has some expectation at startups of billion-dollar rocket ships straight to success, and then succession of some sort. I mean, some lotto system, they have some expectation that, like, everybody knows. I hate to tell you. The idols, some of the idols, don't know. For sure.
See that these appear to be somewhat arbitrary. The
And that's arbitrary. That, for me, that word arbor and environmental kind of go hand in hand as far as if I'm to deconstruct verbal cues, which I try to do since I'm in such a position of, I don't know, left out, left behind. I don't even know how to fumble my way into some of these places, and now I feel like I've been left out of so much. I'm like so far behind. I mean, it's like being locked in a room for 43 years while the world went on. Went on to where? Because it seems to be the same old arguments, and there are idols that set ideology, and one of those idols is missing a vital piece. And cosmologically, astrologically, I mean, others know about it. Between the sundial and the zodiac being split for nefarious purposes, which I still don't understand fully. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza, Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxy is broken. It's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.